The House of Shadows. Claire had always known that marrying Mark meant welcoming his mother, Evelyn, into her life. From the beginning, Evelyn had been a significant presence, sometimes overbearing, often opinionated, but always someone Claire tried to respect. After all, Mark was devoted to his mother, and for Claire, keeping the peace was essential. The house Claire and Mark lived in was more than just bricks and mortar to her. It was the house she had grown up in, the one her parents had painstakingly restored over the years. When they passed away, they left it to Claire, knowing how much it meant to her. Every corner of the home held memories: Christmas mornings by the fireplace, the scent of her mother's baking wafting through the kitchen, the laughter that echoed in the hallways during family gatherings. Claire had always dreamed of raising her own family there, filling the house with new memories while cherishing the old ones. When Mark moved in after their wedding, the house became their shared sanctuary. They spent weekends repainting the walls, selecting new furniture, and planting a garden out back. It wasn't just a house. It was their home, a symbol of their new life together. But as the months passed, Claire noticed that Evelyn seemed to have an unusual interest in the house. She would often suggest changes, some minor and some major, but Claire always felt a prickle of discomfort whenever Evelyn discussed the property. "Why don't you consider selling it, dear?" Evelyn had suggested more than once. "You two could get a fresh start, somewhere new, somewhere more modern." Claire always brushed off the suggestion politely, but it nagged at her. She knew Evelyn's intentions were good. She probably thought a new house would signify a new chapter in Claire and Mark's life. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn saw the house as a relic of the past, something holding them back. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Claire came home to find Mark unusually quiet. He was sitting at the kitchen table, a furrowed brow and a distant look in his eyes. Spread out before him was a pile of documents, papers that Claire recognized immediately. "Mark, what's going on?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. He didn't look up right away. Instead, he gestured to the chair beside him, silently inviting her to sit. Claire's heart began to race as she took her seat, her eyes scanning the papers on the table. "Claire, I don't know how to tell you this," Mark began, his voice heavy with something Claire couldn't yet place, guilt, perhaps, or regret. "But the house, Mom sold it." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They hung in the air, detached from any reality Claire could comprehend. "What do you mean, she sold it?" Claire finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "She can't sell the house. It's ours." Mark closed his eyes, as if trying to gather the strength to explain. "She sold it without telling us. I found out this morning when the new owners called to ask about the move-out date." The room spun, and Claire had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. The house, her home, the place that held every memory of her parents, was gone? Sold without a word, without a discussion, without a chance to stop it? How is that even possible?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "How could she sell our house without our permission?" Mark shook his head, his eyes filled with the same helplessness that was now consuming Claire. "I don't know. She must have somehow convinced the real estate agent that she had the authority, the paperwork. It's all here. It's done, Claire. There's nothing we can do." A cold, hollow feeling settled in Claire's chest as she stared at the papers. Her hands shook as she reached for them, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. How could Evelyn do this? How could she betray them like this? The next day, Claire woke up with a single thought. She needed to confront Evelyn. There was no other way to move forward. Mark, too, was torn between his loyalty to his mother and his love for Claire, but he knew they couldn't avoid the confrontation. So, together, they drove to Evelyn's house. As they pulled into the driveway, Claire felt her stomach churn with anxiety. She had spent countless days here, visiting Evelyn, sharing family dinners, and trying to build a relationship with the woman who had raised Mark. But now, the house felt different, ominous even, as if it too was a part of the betrayal. Evelyn was on the porch, sitting in one of the old wicker chairs she loved so much. She didn't look up as they approached. Claire could see that she was holding something in her hands, perhaps a photograph, or maybe a letter. But what struck Claire most was Evelyn's appearance. She was disheveled, her normally neat hair hanging loose around her face, her eyes red and swollen as if she had been crying for hours. "Mom?" Mark called out softly as they reached the porch steps. Evelyn finally looked up, and the expression on her face was one Claire had never seen before, one of deep regret and sorrow. "Oh, Mark, Claire," she began, her voice cracking. "I've made such a terrible mistake." Claire felt her anger rising again, a flood of emotions she could barely contain. "You sold our house," she said, her voice trembling with the effort to stay calm. "You didn't even ask us. How could you do that, Evelyn?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears again, and she covered her face with her hands. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting us from what?" Mark asked, stepping closer to his mother, his tone one of disbelief. Evelyn looked up at them, her face lined with grief. "There were debts," she admitted. "Debts I couldn't pay off. I didn't want to burden you two with them. I thought if I sold the house quickly, I could cover everything, and you wouldn't have to worry." Claire felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Debts? She hadn't known Evelyn was in financial trouble. Why hadn't she come to them? Why hadn't she asked for help? "You should have told us," Claire said, her voice still tinged with anger. "We could have helped you. This was not your decision to make. That house was our home, my home. You had no right." Evelyn's tears fell freely now, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. "I know," she whispered. "I know that now. I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now that I was wrong. I've destroyed everything." For a long moment, the three of them stood there in silence, the weight of Evelyn's actions pressing down on them. Claire wanted to stay angry, to hold on to her rage, but seeing Evelyn like this, broken, remorseful, devastated, made it difficult. This wasn't the cold, calculating betrayal she had imagined. It was the desperate act of a woman who thought she was helping, but had only made things worse. "I never wanted to hurt you," Evelyn continued, her voice barely audible. "I love you both so much. I didn't know what else to do." Mark knelt beside his mother, taking her hands in his. "Mom, we love you too, but this is so much bigger than any of us realized. We can't just fix this with an apology." Evelyn nodded, her tears subsiding as she took a deep breath. "I know. I've made such a mess of everything, but I want to make it right if I can. I'll do whatever it takes." The days that followed were some of the most challenging of Claire's life. The house was gone. There was no getting it back. The new owners had no interest in selling, and even if they did, the financial hit they would take was too much to bear. Claire and Mark were forced to face the reality of finding a new place to live, a new place to call home. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected began to happen. Claire found herself softening toward Evelyn, who had once been a source of frustration, but was now a reminder of how fragile life could be. Evelyn, for her part, was doing everything she could to repair the damage she had done. She offered to help them find a new home, to contribute financially to ease the burden. She even suggested counseling, both for herself and as a family, to work through the lingering feelings of betrayal. One evening, as Claire and Mark sat in the small apartment they had rented temporarily, Claire found herself thinking about the future. It wasn't the one she had imagined. Her parents' house was gone, and the dreams she had built around it were shattered. But there was something else growing in its place, something stronger. The realization that home wasn't just a physical space, but the people you shared it with. And despite everything, she and Mark were still together, still committed to building a life side by side. "I never thought it would end like this," Claire said softly, looking around the small but cozy living room. Mark wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "It's not the end, Claire. It's just a new beginning." She nodded, leaning into him. "We'll find a new house, will make new memories. And Mom will be part of them, Mark added. If you're okay with that. Claire thought about it for a moment before nodding. Yeah, I think I am. She's learned her lesson, and so have we. We'll figure this out together. Mark kissed her forehead, and Claire felt a sense of peace wash over her. They had lost something irreplaceable, but they hadn't lost each other, and in the end, that was what mattered most. As they began their search for a new home, Claire knew it wouldn't be easy, but this time, they would do it as a family, Evelyn included. They had been through the worst, and they had come out the other side stronger, more united. And that, Claire realized, was the true meaning of home.